Single Dad thought his coworker took the wrong table. Minutes later, he realized she was his blind date. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Josh Brennan sat on his couch in his Indianapolis apartment on a Friday evening at 6:15, staring at the ceiling like it held answers to his problems. And he was seriously reconsidering every life choice that had led him to agree to a blind date set up by his younger sister Maya, who had a terrible track record with matchmaking but refused to acknowledge it. The problem was, Maya had been relentless for the past 3 months, ever since she'd decided that 3 years was long enough for Josh to be single after his divorce. And she'd cornered him at their mom's house 2 weeks ago and refused to let him leave until he agreed to meet someone she described as perfect for you, responsible, loves kids, works in logistics so you'll have stuff to talk about. Josh had pointed out that working in logistics didn't automatically make two people compatible, but Maya had just waved him off and said, "Just trust me for once. Her name's Ivy, and I'm texting you the details right now." What Josh didn't know and wouldn't find out until it was way too late to do anything about it was that the Ivy his sister was setting him up with was Ivy Chen from work, the inventory coordinator who had made his life significantly more complicated ever since she'd started at the distribution warehouse 6 months ago. They worked different shifts mostly. Josh ran the day crew and Ivy handled inventory tracking and coordination, but they overlapped during shift changes and communicated constantly through email and those brief handoff meetings where Josh would explain what his team had processed and Ivy would point out every single discrepancy like she was personally offended by human error. He thought she was uptight and way too intense about spreadsheets, and he was pretty sure she thought he was careless and didn't take his job seriously enough. And their interactions were always professional but cold in that way, where you're polite because you have to be, not because you want to be. 20 minutes later, Josh walked into Marcello's, which was one of those mid-range Italian places with checkered tablecloths and breadsticks that showed up before you even ordered. And the hostess greeted him with a smile that suggested she'd seen way too many awkward first dates. "I'm meeting someone. Reservation should be under Maya probably. Table for two," he said, and the hostess checked her list and nodded. "Table 12, right this way. Your date hasn't arrived yet." She led him to a corner table near the window, and Josh sat down facing the door because he wanted to see this mystery woman before she saw him. And Maya had given him exactly 2 pieces of identifying information, which were black hair, probably wearing glasses. And that was it. No photo, because Maya thought photos ruined the magic of a first meeting. At 6:53, a woman walked through the front door and Josh's stomach dropped straight through the floor because he recognized her immediately. It was Ivy from work, black hair pulled back in a ponytail, glasses, wearing a blue sweater he'd definitely seen her wear to the warehouse. His first thought was, "What the hell is she doing here?" Followed very quickly by, "Oh God, she's going to see me and think I'm stalking her." And he was about to get up and explain when he realized she was looking around like she was searching for someone, and then she checked her phone and started walking directly toward his table. Josh's brain went into full panic mode because there was no universe in which this wasn't about to be the most awkward workplace encounter of all time. And he was already planning his excuse about how this was a total coincidence when Ivy reached table 12 and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts confusion and annoyance. "Josh, what are you doing here?" Ivy asked, and her tone suggested she was not thrilled to see him. And Josh stood up halfway out of his chair because sitting felt weird. "I'm meeting someone. I think you might have the wrong table. This is 12, he said, and pointed at the little number placard on the table, like she couldn't see it herself. Ivy's eyebrows went up and she pulled out her phone. "No, I'm definitely at table 12. I'm meeting someone too. My friend Keisha made a reservation. Maybe yours is a different 12. Josh pulled out his own phone and checked the text from Maya, and it very clearly said table 12 at Marcello's at 7 p.m. And he looked back up at Ivy, who was doing the same thing with her phone. And they both just stood there for a second, staring at each other, while the horrible realization started creeping in. "Wait," Ivy said slowly, and her face was starting to turn red. "Who are you meeting?" And Josh felt his throat go dry because he already knew where this was going. "Someone named Ivy. My sister set it up. I only have a first name." and he watched Ivy's expression shift from confused to mortified. And she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "I'm meeting someone named Josh. My friend Keisha set it up. She said he works in supply chain." They both just stood there staring at each other while the pieces clicked into place with the most horrible clarity. And Josh said, "Your friend is Keisha Rodriguez?" And Ivy nodded. "Your sister is Maya Brennan?" And Josh nodded. And then they both said at exactly the same time. "Are you kidding me right now?" Ivy sat down hard in the chair across from him and put her face in her hands. And Josh sat back down because his legs weren't working properly anymore. And for a solid 30 seconds, neither of them said anything, because what do you even say when you realize you've been set up on a blind date with a coworker you can barely stand to email? The waiter appeared looking cheerful and completely oblivious to the crisis happening at table 12. "Can I start you folks off with some drinks tonight?" And Josh said, "Beer, whatever you have on tap, the biggest one." And Ivy said, "Wine, red, also the biggest one." The waiter sensed the vibe and disappeared quickly, and Josh leaned back in his chair and said, "Maya set me up with you. I can't believe she did this. She knows we work together." Ivy looked up from her hands and her cheeks were bright red. "Keisha knows too. I've complained about you at work. Why wouldn't she tell me?" And Josh felt a little defensive at that. "You've complained about me? I'm not the one who sends 5 emails about a single missing box." And Ivy's eyes narrowed. "Maybe if your crew actually double-checked their counts, I wouldn't have to send 5 emails." They glared at each other for a second, and then both seemed to realize at the same time how ridiculous this entire situation was. And Ivy let out this laugh that sounded kind of hysterical. "This is a nightmare. We can't go on a date. We don't even like each other." Josh pulled out his phone and started texting Maya furiously. "Seriously, you set me up with Ivy from work?" And her response came back almost immediately. "Yes, you're welcome. She's amazing. Just try." Ivy was texting Keisha at the same time and showed Josh her screen where Keisha had written, "You've both been single too long. Give it 1 hour. If it's terrible, you never have to talk about it again." The waiter came back with their drinks and asked if they needed a few more minutes with the menu. And Josh said, "Yeah, a few minutes," because he still hadn't processed what was happening. Ivy took a long drink of her wine and then set the glass down with a sigh. "Look, this is clearly a disaster, but we're already here and I'm starving, and it would be a waste of a reservation. What if we just eat and then agree to never speak of this again?" Josh considered this and took a drink of his beer. "You want to have dinner together? We can barely get through a shift handoff without you pointing out everything my team did wrong." Ivy's jaw tightened. "Because your team doesn't follow protocol. But fine, if you'd rather leave and deal with your sister asking why you bailed, I'll understand." Josh knew she was right about Maya. His sister would absolutely grill him if he left, and his mom would somehow find out, and then he'd have to deal with disappointed grandma energy, which was worse. "Fine, 1 hour, we eat, we make small talk like adults, and then we go back to our normal work thing where we pretend this never happened." And Ivy nodded. "Deal. And for the record, I'm only doing this so Keisha stops setting me up on dates." They ordered food mostly in silence, and when the waiter left, Josh said, "So this is officially the weirdest thing that's happened to me all year." And Ivy actually smiled just a little. "Same, and I once got locked in the warehouse freezer for 2 hours, so that's saying something." The first 20 minutes of dinner were painful in that special way, where 2 people are trapped at a table together, trying to make conversation about literally anything, except the obvious fact that they'd rather be anywhere else. And Josh found himself talking about the weather, which was hands down the most boring topic known to humanity, but at least it was neutral territory. Ivy had ordered chicken parmesan and was cutting it into precise little pieces in a way that didn't surprise Josh at all because, of course, she approached food the same way she approached inventory spreadsheets, with unnecessary attention to detail. They'd exhausted weather and moved on to complaining about traffic on I-465 when Ivy surprised him by asking, "So Maya mentioned you have a daughter. How old is she?" And Josh felt himself relax slightly because talking about Zoe was easy. It was the one part of his life he never had to think twice about. "She's 8. Her name's Zoe. She's basically my entire world," Josh said. and he could hear his voice soften the way it always did when he talked about his kid. Her mom and I split up 3 years ago. It was amicable. My ex remarried and moved to Carmel, but we co-parent pretty well. Zoe stays with me most of the time. Ivy's whole face changed when he talked about Zoe, like someone had flipped a switch, and she leaned forward with genuine interest. Wait, Zoe Brennan? Curly brown hair, obsessed with soccer, talks nonstop about her dog? Josh blinked because that was extremely specific. Yeah, that's her. How do you know my daughter? And Ivy's expression went from interested to almost excited. I'm her soccer coach. I volunteer with the Warehouse Kids League on weekends. I've been coaching her team since August. Josh felt his brain short circuit because Zoe talked about Coach Ivy constantly. Like every single weekend, she'd come home from practice with some story about how Coach Ivy taught them a new drill or brought them orange slices or said something funny, and it had never once occurred to him that Coach Ivy and Ivy Chen from work were the same person. You're Coach Ivy? Zoe loves you. She asks if she can go to practice even on weeks when there isn't practice. And Ivy smiled in a way Josh had never seen at work, warm and genuine and completely different from her professional face. She's one of my favorite kids on the team. She's got this natural talent, but she's also just really kind. Like last week, one of the younger girls fell and scraped her knee, and Zoe sat with her the entire time while I got the first aid kit. Didn't even care that she was missing drills. Josh felt something shift in his chest because hearing someone else see what he saw in his daughter every day meant more than he'd expected it to. They talked about Zoe for the next 20 minutes, and it was the easiest conversation Josh had ever had with Ivy. And he kept having these moments where he'd look at her and think, who is this person, and what did she do with the woman who emails me passive-aggressive messages about shipping manifests? Ivy told him about why she started coaching, how she loved kids but didn't have any of her own yet, and wasn't even dating anyone seriously enough to think about that timeline. And she volunteered because it felt like the closest she could get to the family stuff she wanted someday. Josh found himself actually listening instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. And when she asked about his divorce, he gave her the real answer. Not the sanitized version he usually gave people. My ex-wife wasn't ready to be a mom when Zoe was born. She tried for 4 years, but eventually she admitted she was miserable. And I couldn't make her stay in something that was making her that unhappy, so we split, and she's actually way happier now with her new husband. Ivy didn't do the thing most people did where they immediately said, "Oh, I'm so sorry," with that pitying look. She just nodded and said, "That must have been really hard, but it sounds like you handled it in a way that put Zoe first. That's rare." And Josh appreciated that more than she probably knew. The waiter came back to clear their plates and asked about dessert, and Josh looked at his watch and realized they'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours, which was way longer than the 1 hour they'd agreed to. And when he pointed that out, Ivy looked surprised and checked her own phone. I didn't even notice. I guess when we're not talking about work, we're actually tolerable to each other, she said with a slight smile. And Josh laughed. Yeah, turns out you're way less scary when you're not lecturing me about damaged goods protocols. Ivy threw her napkin at him. I don't lecture, I inform. There's a difference. They split a piece of tiramisu because Ivy said she couldn't eat a whole dessert alone, and Josh had a weakness for anything with espresso in it. And by the time they paid the bill and walked out to the parking lot, it was almost 9:30, and Josh couldn't remember the last time he'd stayed somewhere that long willingly. They stood by Ivy's car, and there was this awkward moment where neither of them knew what to say. And finally Josh said, "So this was better than expected. I'm kind of annoyed at Maya for ambushing us, but also she might have been right about us having stuff in common." Ivy nodded. Same. Keisha is going to be insufferable when I tell her this didn't go terribly. But I don't know, Josh. Dating a coworker feels like asking for trouble, especially when we already have friction at work. Josh knew she was right, but something about the way she said it made him think she was trying to convince herself, not him. Yeah, probably a bad idea. Let's just go back to how things were and pretend this was a weird fever dream. Monday morning hit Josh like a truck because suddenly he was hyper-aware of every interaction with Ivy in a way he'd never been before. And when she walked past him in the hallway with her coffee, he caught himself noticing things like the way she always wore her hair up for work and how her glasses slipped down her nose when she was reading something on her tablet. The shift handoff meeting felt charged in a way it never had. And when Ivy pointed out a discrepancy in Saturday's count, Josh didn't get defensive like he normally would. He just said, "You're right, I'll talk to my team about double-checking." And Ivy looked at him like he'd grown a second head. His crew definitely noticed something was different because his lead guy Dave pulled him aside after and said, "Boss, you feeling okay? You usually argue with Ivy for at least 5 minutes before you agree with her." And Josh had to make up something about being tired. That Saturday at Zoe's soccer practice, Josh showed up early and watched Ivy work with the kids. And he saw this completely different version of her, patient and encouraging and goofy in a way that made all the 8-year-olds think she was the coolest person alive. Zoe ran over during water break and said, "Dad, did you know Coach Ivy works at your warehouse? She told me today, isn't that so cool?" And Josh said, "Yeah, Bug. I work with her sometimes. She's pretty great at her job." And Zoe nodded enthusiastically. "She's great at everything. Can she come over for dinner sometime?" Josh felt panic rise in his chest because that was a terrible idea for so many reasons. Maybe someday, kiddo, go finish practice. After practice, Ivy came over to where Josh was standing and said quietly, "I didn't tell her about the date thing. I figured that's not appropriate to share with kids." And Josh felt a wave of respect because she was right, and he appreciated that she'd thought about those boundaries. Tuesday afternoon, Josh did something that was either brave or incredibly stupid. He texted Ivy and asked if she wanted to grab coffee after work. Neutral territory, no pressure, just talk. She agreed, and they met at a Starbucks halfway between the warehouse and her apartment. And when they sat down with their drinks, Josh said, "I know we agreed to forget the whole date thing happened, but I can't stop thinking about it. And I keep wondering if maybe we wrote this off too fast just because we work together." Ivy stirred her latte with way more focus than it required. "I've been thinking about it too, but Josh, we're already warehouse gossip sometimes when people see us arguing. Can you imagine if people found out we were dating? Plus, there's Zoe. She's already attached to me as her coach. What happens if we try this and it doesn't work out?" Josh leaned back in his chair. "Those are all valid points, but also what if we're missing out on something good because we're scared of the what-ifs? What if we just keep it quiet for a while? Take it really slow. See if there's actually something here before we worry about everyone else?" Ivy considered this for longer than Josh would have liked, and finally she said, "Okay, but we set ground rules. No telling people at work. We don't act different during shift changes, and we're honest with each other if this starts feeling like a mistake. Deal." Josh stuck out his hand and Ivy shook it. "Deal. So does this mean I can take you to dinner again? Like an actual intentional date this time?" Ivy smiled. "Yeah, but not Marcello's. I don't think I can show my face there again after that disaster." 3 weeks went by, and they fell into this pattern of secret dates that felt like they were in high school sneaking around, coffee on opposite sides of town, lunch at places where warehouse people wouldn't go, walks at parks during weird hours, and Josh found himself looking forward to seeing Ivy in a way that had nothing to do with work. She was funny in this dry, sarcastic way that caught him off guard, and she actually listened when he talked about the stress of single parenting and didn't try to fix everything, just let him vent. They'd only kissed twice, and both times had been careful and sweet, like they were both scared of moving too fast. And Josh was starting to think maybe Maya had actually done something right for once in her matchmaking career. Everything went sideways on a Sunday afternoon when Josh took Zoe to the park on the north side, and they were feeding ducks by the pond when Zoe suddenly shrieked, "Dad, that's Coach Ivy!" and took off running before Josh could stop her. Ivy was walking with coffee in hand and saw Zoe barreling toward her and caught her in a hug. And then she looked up and saw Josh, and her expression went from happy to panicked in about 2 seconds. Zoe was chattering a mile a minute. "What are you doing here? Are you here with my dad? Are you guys hanging out? This is so cool." And Josh walked over, trying to do damage control, but it was too late. His 8-year-old had connected dots he'd specifically been trying to keep separate. Ivy looked at Josh with wide eyes that clearly said, "What do I say?" And Josh knelt down to Zoe's level. "Hey, Bug, Coach Ivy and I are just friends who ran into each other. No big deal, okay?" But Zoe was grinning like she'd just solved a mystery. "But you're always friends with people, and you don't look at them like that. Are you dating her? Because that would be so awesome." Josh felt his face get hot, and Ivy looked like she wanted to disappear, and she said gently, "Zoe, your dad and I are just getting to know each other. It's really new, and we're not making a big deal about it yet, okay?" Zoe nodded, but she was still smiling. "Okay, but when you do make a big deal, can I be the flower girl?" And Josh said, "Bug, that's way too far ahead. Let's just keep this between us for now, all right?" That night, Zoe told Maya everything, and Maya called Josh at 10 p.m., scream laughing, "You're dating Ivy and you didn't tell me? I'm the one who set you up. I deserve updates." And Josh groaned because he'd known this was coming. By Wednesday, their mom knew because Maya couldn't keep her mouth shut. And Josh got a call from Grandma saying, "Your sister tells me you're seeing that nice girl from work. When do I get to meet her properly?" And Josh wanted to crawl into a hole. At work on Thursday, one of the dock guys saw Ivy getting into Josh's truck in the parking lot. They'd been carpooling twice a week to save gas. Completely innocent. But by Friday afternoon, 3 different people had asked Josh if he was dating the inventory coordinator. Josh met Ivy after her shift that Friday, and she looked stressed in a way he hadn't seen since their disaster first date. "This is too much too fast. Everyone knows or thinks they know. Zoe's involved now. Your family's asking questions. Work people are gossiping. I can't breathe, Josh." He tried to take her hand, but she pulled back. "I told you I was worried about this, about everything getting tangled up. And now it's exactly what I was afraid of. I think I need space to figure out if I can actually do this." Josh felt his stomach drop. "Ivy, come on, we can handle the gossip. We just keep doing what we're doing." But she shook her head. "I don't know if I can. I'm sorry, I just need some time." She walked away and Josh stood in the parking lot, watching her leave and wondering how something that had felt so right 3 weeks ago had just fallen apart in his hands. 2 weeks of silence felt like the longest stretch of Josh's entire life. And going back to cold professionalism with Ivy at work was brutal in a way he hadn't expected, because now he knew what her actual smile looked like versus her polite work smile, and he could tell the difference every single time she walked past him in the warehouse without making eye contact. Zoe asked about Coach Ivy constantly, wanting to know if they were still friends or if something had happened, and Josh had to keep saying, "Adults are complicated sometimes, Bug, but it's nothing you did wrong," which didn't satisfy his daughter at all, but was the best answer he could come up with. He threw himself into work, trying not to think about how much he missed texting Ivy random things throughout the day, and his crew noticed he was crankier than usual, which said a lot because Josh prided himself on being the calm supervisor who didn't lose it over small stuff. Everything shifted on a Wednesday morning when corporate sent out an email about a major inventory audit happening that week. And by noon, the regional manager was on site going through records looking for discrepancies that could explain why the system showed $2,000 worth of missing product. Josh's day shift crew was immediately under scrutiny because the missing items had been logged during their processing hours, and Josh spent 3 hours in meetings defending his team and going through paperwork trying to figure out what had happened. By Thursday afternoon, the regional manager was talking about formal write-ups and potential terminations, and Josh felt sick because he knew his guys hadn't stolen anything, but he couldn't prove it, and the numbers didn't lie according to corporate. Friday morning, Josh was in his office staring at spreadsheets that made 0 sense when Ivy knocked on his doorframe, and when he looked up, she was holding her tablet with that focused expression she got when she was deep in data mode. "Can I come in? I think I found something about the missing inventory," she said, and her voice was strictly professional, but Josh could hear something underneath it, and he nodded because at this point he'd take help from anyone. Ivy sat down across from his desk and pulled up a series of reports. "I've been going through the system logs for the past week. I know I didn't have to, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I found a batch processing error that happened on the 15th. The system double-counted outgoing shipments, which made it look like product left the warehouse twice when it only left once. Your crew didn't do anything wrong. It was a software glitch." Josh stared at the screen she was showing him and felt this overwhelming wave of relief mixed with gratitude. "You dug through a week of logs to find this? Ivy, you didn't have to do that, especially not after." And he trailed off because he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Ivy looked at him directly for the first time in 2 weeks. "I did it because it was the right thing to do, And because I know you and your team care about doing things correctly, even when we've disagreed about methods, I wasn't going to let corporate railroad you over a system error. Josh forwarded the information to the regional manager immediately, and within 2 hours his crew was cleared, and corporate was apologizing for the accusation. And when Josh went to find Ivy to thank her properly, she was in the break room making tea. "Hey," Josh said, and Ivy turned around, looking guarded. "I wanted to say thank you. You saved my job and my crew's jobs. You didn't have to go to bat for me, especially after I pushed too hard and scared you off." Ivy set down her mug and leaned against the counter. "You didn't scare me off, Josh. I scared myself off. I got overwhelmed by everyone being in our business and I panicked. But the past 2 weeks have sucked, and I kept thinking about how walking away didn't make me feel better. It just made me miss you." Josh felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "I missed you too, like a ridiculous amount, and I kept wondering if I should have fought harder to make you stay, or if giving you space was the right call. But Ivy, I need you to know I was falling for you, and pulling back didn't make that go away." Ivy's eyes got shiny and she blinked a few times. "I was falling for you too. That's why it scared me so much. Because if this was just casual, it wouldn't matter what people thought, or if it got messy. But it wasn't casual for me, and I didn't know how to handle that." Josh took a step closer. "So what do we do now? Because I don't want to pressure you, but I also don't want to go back to pretending we're just coworkers who barely tolerate each other. That feels worse than taking the risk." Ivy thought about it for a second and then said, "What if we stop hiding it? Like actually just own it, date for real, deal with the work gossip because it's going to happen anyway. And if people have a problem with it, that's their issue, not ours. I'm tired of being scared of what ifs." They agreed to try again, but this time without the secrecy. And when Josh's mom invited him to Sunday dinner that weekend, he asked if he could bring someone, and his mom said, "Is it that Ivy girl Maya won't stop talking about?" And Josh said yes, and his mom sounded delighted. Sunday dinner was chaotic in the best way. Zoe was thrilled that Coach Ivy was there and spent the entire meal showing her drawings and talking about school. Maya kept giving Josh thumbs up from across the table like a complete dork, and his mom grilled Ivy with questions that would have been intimidating, except Ivy handled it like a pro. After dinner, Zoe pulled Ivy aside and asked very seriously, "Are you going to be my dad's girlfriend for real now?" And Ivy knelt down and said, "Yeah, Bug, if that's okay with you." And Zoe hugged her so hard she almost fell over. 2 months later, they'd settled into an actual relationship that felt solid in a way Josh hadn't experienced in years. And the work gossip had died down once people realized they were serious and not just having some dramatic fling. Ivy met Josh's ex-wife at a soccer game, and they were cordial in that way co-parents' new partners have to be. And Josh met Ivy's parents, who were skeptical about the divorce situation at first but warmed up when they saw how he treated their daughter. They had their first real fight about Josh's crew leaving equipment in the wrong zone, and Ivy being frustrated about it, but instead of shutting down, they actually talked through it and figured out a compromise. And Josh realized that disagreeing with someone didn't mean the relationship was doomed, it just meant they were two different people learning to work together. 4 months after their disastrous first date, Josh suggested they go back to Marcello's for dinner, and Ivy looked at him like he'd lost his mind, but agreed when he said he wanted to replace the bad memory with a good one. They sat at the same corner table, table 12, and ordered the same food they'd had that first night, and halfway through the meal, Ivy started laughing. "Remember when we first sat down here and you thought I'd stolen your table?" Josh grinned. "I thought you were the last person on earth I'd ever want to have dinner with. I was so wrong, it's actually embarrassing." Ivy reached across the table and took his hand. "And now?" And Josh squeezed her fingers. "Now you're the person I want to have dinner with every single night, assuming you can tolerate my terrible table manners." Zoe interrupted them by appearing at their table with Maya, who'd been babysitting, and decided to bring her to the restaurant as a surprise. "Dad," Aunt Maya said, "if I was really quiet, I could come say hi. Are you guys on a date? This is so romantic." Josh laughed and pulled out a chair for his daughter. "Yeah, Bug, we're on a date. Want to join us for dessert?" Zoe climbed into the chair and looked between Josh and Ivy with this pleased expression. "Does this mean Coach Ivy is going to be my stepmom someday? Because I already told my friends she probably would be, and I don't want to be a liar." Ivy's face turned red and Josh felt his own face get hot, and Maya was trying not to laugh from where she stood near the table. Zoe, that's a someday question, not a right now question. Let's just focus on dessert, okay? But Ivy surprised him by saying, someday maybe, if your dad keeps being this sweet and doesn't mess it up. And she was smiling when she said it, and Zoe looked satisfied with that answer. They ordered tiramisu to share, and Zoe told them about her day in exhaustive detail, and Josh sat there watching Ivy listen to his daughter with genuine interest and thought about how he'd almost walked away from this because he was too stubborn to see past their work dynamic. Maya left with Zoe after dessert, and Josh and Ivy sat there for a few more minutes just talking. And when they walked out to the parking lot, Ivy said, you know what's wild? If your sister and my best friend hadn't set us up, we probably would have spent the next 5 years just barely tolerating each other at work and never knowing we could have had this. Josh pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Remind me to send Maya a really good Christmas present this year, and also to never doubt her matchmaking skills again, because she was annoyingly right about us. They drove home separately because they weren't living together yet. Taking it slow still meant something, even 4 months in. But Josh went to bed that night thinking about the future in a way he hadn't let himself do in years, thinking about someday and maybe, and all the possibilities that came with finding the right person in the absolute last place you thought to look. Sometimes the person you can't stand is just the person you haven't understood yet, and love shows up disguised as the coworker who drives you crazy until you actually take the time to see past the surface stuff and realize they've been exactly what you needed all along. Josh had thought Ivy was uptight and difficult. Ivy had thought Josh was careless and defensive. And they were both wrong because what they actually were was two people trying to do their jobs well, who just needed to see each other outside of work stress and spreadsheets. If this story reminded you that first impressions aren't always right, and sometimes the best relationships come from the most unlikely places, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear that love doesn't always look like you think it will. Drop a comment about where you're watching from and tell us about a time you completely misjudged someone and ended up being totally wrong. We love hearing your stories. Thanks for being here with us. And remember, sometimes the person sitting across from you at the wrong table is actually sitting at exactly the right one.